could improve the productivity of your software development by 2 to 3x, would it matter? If you could quit saying no to all the requests that your business partners are asking for, would it be helpful for your customers? What if you decided all this stuff we've been talking about today is too hard, too difficult, wouldn't work in your company, but your competitors decided they could do it? Would that matter to you? If they got 2 to 3 times more productive and you didn't get a chance to get that, would that make a difference to your business? I think that's why we're all here, and that's what we're trying to transform, and that's what we're trying to talk about while we're here today. To give you a feel for this, come back with me to 2008, to the LaserJet business, embedded firmware and LaserJet printers. I was in the middle of that business for a long period of time. The firmware development had been a bottleneck for the LaserJet business for 2 decades. The organization had tried to spin their way out of the problem. They tried to work their way out of the problem. It hired engineers all over the world, could not hire people quick enough, could not do things fast enough and spend money within a company the size of HP to enable that bottleneck in their business to go away. It was grinding things to a halt. Marketing had almost given up asking for new features because it was impossible and they couldn't make it happen. Hopefully that doesn't feel anything like any of your businesses, but potentially some of it does. There's a lot of old, large traditional organizations that struggle with these types of things. Through the process of 2 to 3 years, we fundamentally changed everything about how we did development and modernized it and changed it to the point where we took our R&D spend from $100 million a year to $55 million a year in a matter of a few months. It was 2008, remember? The businesses couldn't afford it. The economy was in a downturn. We had to take the cost out of the system, and we did. But we also had to deliver to our customers. So we fundamentally changed our processes, our approaches, and everything that we did. And instead of not being able to deliver products with almost half the cost in R&D, we're delivering 140% more products at the same time with the same common code base of firmware. And at the same time, we went from 5% of our capacity going to new features, new capabilities, and innovation to 40% of our capacity going to innovation, new features, and new capabilities. So if you were able to do something like that for your business, would it matter? Or if you decided it was going to be too hard, but your competitors figured out how to do it, would it matter? I think that's fundamentally what we're here to talk about today and tomorrow, and hopefully you take away the opportunities. What I've done is I've provided a copy of the story for everybody to take home with them and read about it. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the story or the journey. It's a case study. Your story is going to be different, your journey is going to be different, but the opportunities are there, all the business results are there, and it gives you a feel for what is possible, and it gives you a feel for what a journey would look like, what a journey would feel like, and hopefully it helps inspire you, and it's something that you can share with your organization to get people excited and engaged about starting your own journey. The rest of my time here I'm not going to spend on any of that because you can take it home with you. What I'm going to spend my time and energy on is helping you understand what it looks like to transform your own organizations and what's there. And I'm going to talk about this in a very different way than a lot of the other people have talked to you about it today. Most people go into this agile transformation or whatever, and they start with small teams, and they work with what worked in small companies, and we're here because we're part of large enterprises. And doing this in a large enterprise is different, and I'm going to talk more about how do you apply the principles of Agile and the principles of DevOps at scale, as opposed to trying to figure out how to start small with those things and scale them up into the business, because I think that's where you make the biggest difference in what's going on. Everybody knows the waterfall development model. Everybody understands how that works. Everybody understands that while you can make it work, what typically happens to you is you either start burning out people or you start slipping schedules when you get to the long integration end games and you start finding things out in the process. The principles behind Agile, if you look at what the benefits are to the business, is enabling you to do smaller, more frequent releases of code, and even if it doesn't go to the customer because the customer doesn't need it, at least it's qualified and ready to go, such that the business decides when you release and how often you release, not your development processes. So breaking that down, and it also enables you to work on the most important features first, the ones that are able to provide the most value, and get them out of the customer and test those ideas and see if they're working. So that's the basic principle behind Agile. Notice I haven't said Scrum, I haven't said stand-up, I haven't said any of those other words. I'm talking about the principles of Agile and what it provides at the business level. One of the things that I'd walk away with, the business results that I shared with you, we did not spend a lot of time at the team level. We did not bring in coaches. We did not talk about how to do stand-ups, burn-down charts, or any of those other things. We talked about applying the principles at the enterprise level and leading the change and driving the change, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and then I'll quickly get through some of the pieces so I can get to the test automation piece that Bashir's got me signed up to deliver. But I will say that as we went through this process, what we found is we got 2 to 3x improvements in our business productivity, but I couldn't look to the teams that were doing stand-ups and stories and those different things and see dramatic differences. At the same time in the business, I saw 2 to 3x improvement in productivity. So I would say, and I've talked with a lot of other people in the Agile community that are struggling with this, is I think how the team works in an enterprise is important, but it's a second order effect. The first order effect is how does everything come together in the enterprise and deliver value to the customer. And I go to a lot of conferences, and the other thing I would say about the Scrum is that's not Agile in the enterprise, and if you don't do it well, and if you don't take it all the way out and do a safe model or something different to deal with enterprise issues, you end up with the classical solution of a water Scrum fall solution. The businesses are still expecting you to commit to full 100% of your capacity 2 years out. You're doing stand-ups and you're doing Agile and you're doing all that, but you haven't solved the DevOps challenges of how do you release code on a frequent, ongoing basis, and so you're still dealing with long integration cycles and those things that don't tend to work. So how do you do this? And I think this is an interesting group to get to talk to about this, because I think when you look at transforming organizations and you look at applying these ideas and making this happen, the missing link is in this room. I go to Agile conferences, I go to conferences all over the world, and I see people talk to engineers, and engineers get excited, and engineers get enthused about wanting to make changes, and they come back into the organizations, and they come back to an organization that has leaders that aren't engaged and excited to lead the change and make it happen. So the biggest piece that's missing, and Jeremy nailed it, right? Where you got your transformation is you had an empowered, excited executive who was leading the change. That's what's needed in these organizations, and it doesn't help just to send your engineers to conferences. The executive team needs to engage, not just support, not just enthuse the ideas. They need to lead the change. They need to engage in the process. And I would say one of my top recommendations is don't do continuous delivery, don't do Agile, don't do any of those things. What you should do is understand what are the business objectives of your transformation. Why are you trying to transform? What do you expect to get out of it? At HP, we went in, we were the bottleneck for the business, had been for 2 decades. The objective was to no longer be the bottleneck, free up capacity for innovation, and drive for a 10x improvement in productivity for developers. We didn't go off to do Agile. We looked at those toolboxes, we looked at what they provided, and we understood what our biggest problems were, and we thought about how do we use the tools that are over here to improve our business. So start with the business objectives. The next one is an enterprise-level continuous improvement process. Your business strategy is not an aggregate of all your team's strategy, is it? Should your continuous improvement process be an aggregate of what the teams are doing? Or as an executive team that's leading this transition, are you going to set objectives that you want to hit on a monthly basis? Are you going to measure yourself and hold yourself accountable for getting that? And are you going to do a continuous improvement process to figure it out? So what's in the book that's out there to share with you is not the result of a 4-year plan. It's the result of 3.5 years of monthly plans. We tried to figure out what was most important to us, what was most broken in our business, what was the hardest to fix, and we set an objective for what we thought we could get done in the next month, and we got everybody aligned about it, and then we drove hard. Most of my time during that time was not Scrum meetings or any of those sort of things. I had metrics online that measured and tracked that, and I spent all my time wandering around the organization, understanding why things that people thought they could get done in the beginning of the month weren't getting done. And it wasn't, Peter, why didn't you get it done? It's like, well, Peter, what happened? Why didn't this get done? What got in your way? And that led to the next set of continuous improvements that you needed to continue to go after. So whether it was build time, or whether it was test automation or CI or getting the environments right, you needed to be actively driving and leading on that and making that change happen. The bigger part that you're not going to get out of the Scrum teams is a really enterprise level DevOps approach. So how do you get to always releasable code at the enterprise, which is where I'm going to spend a lot of my time today. But that's not going to be driven, and that type of transformation for a very large enterprise, by the teams, because they're going to be focused on how do they get their stories done. So that needs to be led and driven at the executive level. And then probably the biggest and hardest things to change is the planning process. How do you get prioritized backlog? How do you have flexibility in your planning process?